Hello. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about parental licensing and how it takes a well-rounded and competent individual to create a nurturing environment for a child. So before a child is conceived, that competence should be proven to the state. We all probably think of having children as a fundamental right? But is it, or rather should it be? Even with things that are considered fundamental rights, there's limits. Like with free speech, you can't go around promoting violence, hate speech, or lying to officers about crimes. That'd get you in a lot of trouble. This doesn't mean that we don't have free speech. This just means that there's limits. Similarly, when speaking about limits, just recently a gentleman dubbed the Sperminator, was making recent headlines all over the media after fathering almost 100 children. How far should this right be stretched? I know this comes off as rather draconian, but it is not meant to be. License should not make its licensing. Parents should not make it so that only the best possible parents are able to procreate. It would merely be intended to weed out the worst possible parents. This is important to consider as we're all familiar with the phrase trauma begets trauma. But what is really meant is that a traumatic childhood will beget a traumatic childhood. So the competency and mental health of a parent is in the best interest of everybody, but most importantly, the child and the child's child, and so on, as this might create generational trauma. Clearly, being an incompetent parent is something that can cause harm to others. Other things in society that have potential for harming others requires licensing, such as driving and gun ownership. One more thing, as we've all heard in the news, global warming is a threat to humans' way of life. And our overpopulated footprint is a direct cause. So maybe requiring parents to go through a licensing process might dissuade many from not having additional children, and might also be a solution for the overpopulation problem. We already have a licensing process or competency process in place that might work if implemented. This is the adoption process. Let's explore all this a little further. So a child's formative years are extremely important and shape the way they view and interact with the world. And children with traumatic experiences will indeed suffer for it for the rest of their lives. According to sociologist Annette Leroux, in her recent book, Unequal Childhoods, depending on a child's home environment, this will lead to different health, income, and education levels into their adulthood. In her book, she detailed a study in which 88 families with 10-year-olds were interviewed and observed. Now, what was concluded was that basically inequality gets handed down. Perhaps some people are not quite ready yet to have children, and once they prove they are to the state is when they should be allowed to have children. Another recent study conducted by psychiatrist Dr. Sujata Satapathy detailed how trauma can also lead to many different health conditions, mental health conditions, such as PTSD. This was all concluded through an experiment in which 50 teens between the ages of 13 and 38 were recruited from a tertiary care hospital, all suffering from some sort of dissociative or anxiety disorder. Several tests were administered, including anxiety disorder screenings, self-evaluations, and an impact of events scale. A significant relationship was found between childhood trauma and dissociative disorders and panic disorders, anxiety disorders, and also separation anxiety disorders. This all indicated that childhood trauma is an early predictor of potential disorders, including anxiety and dissociative disorders well into a person's adulthood. Most of us have a license for one thing or another. Some for practicing law, some even for medicine, some for driving. As some things have a higher potential for harm, if the licensee is unqualified, the requirements tend to be a little more intensive. This is meant to protect people. Even with the licensing requirements for medical professionals, which is oftentimes the most rigorous, we still often see malpractice and deaths. Imagine how much more it would be without the insanely rigorous training that they receive before licensing. So the worst possible candidates do get weeded out. So consider this an analogy to parental licensing, as the most vulnerable group of people are children and thus should be the most protected. Competencies should be proven and displayed before having children, as incompetent parents should have an extremely high potential for harm. Overpopulation is also something that has been afflicting humans recently. Overpopulation has many negative effects, the most obvious being resource scarcity, unemployment rates, poverty, and deforestation. There are other not as glaring but equally problematic effects from overpopulation. Those include the greenhouse gases that come from the consumption of our finite resources. It is actually predicted that by the year 2060, the North Atlantic jet stream could be permanently shifted due to global warming. This jet stream migration could have many weather-related consequences that may be permanent. In recorded history, there have been many weather-related calamities. This is because weather migrates through the jet stream, essentially rides the jet streams. So if weather is not able to ride across a jet stream, it causes heat waves in a certain area, or flooding if there's too much rain over an extended period of time. According to a recent article on the World Economic Forum, actually, in 1740, winds blew at about half their usual speed across the European atmosphere, cooling temperatures and dramatically reducing precipitation. What followed was a famine that led to the death of nearly 500,000 people because crops just simply wouldn't grow without the rainfall. The future trajectory of jet streams is still largely in humans' control. These calamities serve as a warning of natural disasters that may come but can still be averted. The adoption process already has a system in place that can be used, and that system is meant to ensure that children go to nurturing homes and reach their fullest potential. I quote the Illinois.gov website. Also, according to Illinois.gov, this whole process is actually run by the state, specifically the DCFS, the Department of Child and Family Services, as they are very much involved in child rearing, as they are a government-funded social service created to protect children who are abused and neglected. The DCFS does already get involved when biological parents are found unsuitable for childcare. It would not be hard for them to combine these two elements and make it so that this will essentially be the licensing process. This also actually brings up the question, are adopted children more deserving than biological children? Just to sum everything up, and hopefully this is giving you all a different sort of perspective. This is with the best interest of all those involved, and is simply meant to weed out the worst possible parents and protect vulnerable children. Similarly to other rights, the right to children should not be unconditional, solely based on the principle that it is a right. Traumatic childhoods lead to developmental issues and mental health issues that can be generational. Most things that have potential to cause harm require licensing. Therefore, bringing up children should also, since it has the highest potential for harm, especially since they're a very vulnerable group. The state already is involved in child rearing, and it is not too much of a stretch for them to start including a licensing process. Thank you for listening.